The metal doors of the Zathri ship opened with a soft hiss. Ambassador Frank Miller took a deep breath and straightened his navy blue tie. This was it. First contact with an alien species that had been watching Earth for the past decade. The future of humanity might depend on what happened in the next hour. You ready? Asked Susan Baker, his assistant and the only other human allowed on the alien ship. Frank nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. The hallway they walked through was tall and narrow, with strange symbols etched into the dark purple walls. The air felt thicker than Earth's, with a slight sweet smell that reminded Frank of cinnamon. 2 Zathri guards led the way, their hard exoskeletons clicking against the floor with each step. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, with 4 arms, and compound eyes that reminded Frank of dragonflies from Earth. The diplomatic room was large and circular. 7 Zathri waited inside, standing in a perfect half-circle. Unlike the guards, these Zathri wore colorful bands around their upper arms, marking their rank and position. Ambassador Miller of Earth, announced one of the guards before backing away. Frank stepped forward and bowed slightly. Earth scientists and leaders had spent months debating the proper greeting. A bow seemed safest respectful without requiring physical contact that might spread germs or cause offense. The tallest Zathri in the center stepped forward. Its exoskeleton was darker than the others, almost black, with gold bands wrapped around all 4 arms. I am Captain Vexther of the Zathri Dominion, it said, its voice coming through the translator device in Frank's ear. The actual sounds from the alien were clicks and hisses that no human could understand. You stand before the might of the Zathri Dominion, human. Your species is new to the galactic stage. You would be wise to demonstrate proper deference. Frank smiled gently. On behalf of Earth and all humans, I thank you for this meeting. We are eager to learn from those who have traveled the stars longer than us. He held out his hand, then remembered the gesture was meaningless to the aliens and lowered it. The Zathri captain's compound eyes seemed to study Frank carefully. You are not afraid, it said, sounding confused. Should I be? Frank asked, still smiling. The aliens exchanged glances, their antennae twitching rapidly. Most species tremble when first meeting the Zathri, explained a smaller alien to the captain's right. This one had green bands and carried what looked like a tablet. I am Science Officer Klazar. Your biological readings show elevated heart rate, but none of the fear responses we typically observe. Frank nodded. We humans get nervous in new situations, but we're also excited by them. Right now, I'm probably feeling both. Fascinating, said Klazar, tapping something into its tablet. The report said humans were emotional creatures, but they failed to mention this complexity. Captain Vexther clicked its mandibles. We will begin formal negotiations tomorrow. Today, we will show you where you will stay during the talks. The next 3 days passed in a blur of meetings and cultural exchanges. Frank learned that the Zathri were a hive-like species with a strict social order. They valued strength and control above all else. Most importantly, he learned they had encountered many other alien species before humans, and most of those meetings had not ended peacefully. On the 4th day, Frank noticed something different when he and Susan entered the meeting room. The air seemed heavier, and there was a slight green tint near the vents in the ceiling. Susan coughed. Frank, something's wrong. I feel. Her eyes widened suddenly, and she grabbed the edge of the table. Oh God, they're here. They're all here. Frank knew immediately what was happening. His own mind was filling with visions of his greatest fears, his late wife Nancy's disappointed face as cancer took her, Earth burning under alien weapons, his own failure to protect his people. The Zathri were testing them with some kind of fear drug, but instead of panicking, Frank took a seat at the table. He smiled. Interesting approach to diplomacy, Captain, he said calmly. Is this how you greet all your guests? The Zathri delegation seemed frozen in shock. Captain Vexther's mandibles opened and closed rapidly. This is impossible, said Science Officer Klazar, checking readings on its tablet. The fear gas is working. Both humans show the neurological signs of extreme terror. Yet you sit there smiling. Susan had managed to control her breathing, following Frank's lead. Her hands still shook, but she sat straight in her chair. "You seem surprised," Frank said. "Did you expect us to run? To beg? To attack?" "All three are common responses," admitted Klazar. "Sometimes all at once." Frank leaned forward. "The gas is working perfectly. I'm terrified right now. I can see my dead wife. I can see my planet burning. I can see everything I've ever been afraid of." He tapped his finger on the table. "But here's something your studies of humans missed. We live with fear every day of our lives, and we've learned to function despite it." Susan nodded, her voice shaky but determined. "On Earth, we call it courage. Not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite being afraid." The Zathri captain made a sharp gesture, and the vents in the ceiling opened wider, clearing the green mist from the room. "In 3,000 years of space exploration," Captain Vexter said slowly, "we have never encountered a species that could withstand the fear test this way." Frank smiled again, genuine this time. "Captain, I think this might be the beginning of a very interesting relationship between our species." The Zathri captain's antennae twitched rapidly, what Frank had come to recognize as their version of deep thought. "Perhaps," Vexler said finally, "we have much to learn from each other." As the air cleared, Frank felt his own fears fading, but the smile remained on his face. The first real test had come sooner than expected, and humanity had passed in a way the aliens never anticipated. Not with strength or technology, but with something uniquely human, the ability to smile in the face of fear. The day after the fear gas incident, everything changed. Frank and Susan were no longer treated as just representatives of a new species. The Zathri now watched them with something that looked almost like respect. Captain Vexter invited Frank to tour the ship, something no other alien diplomat had been offered before. As they walked through the massive engine room, the captain's questions became more personal. "You said you saw your dead wife when the gas affected you," Vexter said. The translator in Frank's ear made the clicks and hisses sound almost gentle. "Yet you did not react with distress. Explain this." Frank paused, looking at the glowing blue core that powered the massive ship. "Nancy died 5 years ago. Cancer, a disease that makes cells in our body grow wrong. For months I was afraid every day. Afraid of losing her, afraid of living without her, afraid I wasn't doing enough. And now? The fear never goes away completely. But humans learn to carry it. It becomes part of us without controlling us." Frank turned to face the alien captain. "What does Zathri fear, Captain?" The captain's mandibles clicked rapidly. "An improper question. Is it? You've seen our fears? Seems only fair?" After a long silence, Vexter spoke. "We fear chaos, disorder, the breaking of the hive structure that has allowed our species to thrive for 10,000 years. Frank nodded. "That makes sense. Your entire society is built on order. And humans, what does your society fear most?" Frank smiled. "That's the interesting thing. We don't agree on what to fear. Some humans fear change, others fear staying the same. Some fear being alone, others fear being controlled by the group." "Such disorder should make your species weak," Vexter said. "Actually, it makes us stronger. Different fears lead to different solutions, more ideas, more ways to solve problems." The captain led Frank to a viewing area where they could see Earth through a large window. The blue planet looked small and fragile from this distance. "Your world has survived many challenges," Vexler said. "Natural disasters, climate shifts, your own weapons, yet you persist." "We're stubborn that way," Frank replied. Back in their quarters that evening, Susan was excited about her own discoveries. She had spent the day with Science Officer Klazar. "They visited over 200 planets with intelligent life," she told Frank. "And they test every species with that fear gas. It's how they decide if a species is a threat or a potential ally." Frank sat on the edge of his bed. "And what did they learn about us?" "That's the thing, they don't know what to make of us." Klazar said most species either collapse in terror, become violent, or try to surrender when exposed to the gas. Susan paced the small room. "Apparently our Reaction suggests we might be more dangerous than they thought, but also potentially more valuable as allies. Did Klazar tell you what they fear? Frank asked. Susan nodded. Chaos, disorder, the same things Captain Vexler told you. It's built into their biology. They evolve from hive insects, so the survival of the group is everything to them. That explains a lot about their diplomacy style. The next morning, Frank found 3 more Zathri ships had joined the first one in Earth's orbit. When he asked about them during the day's negotiations, Captain Vexler's answer was not reassuring. The High Council is interested in your species? They have sent observers? Frank felt a chill. Observers or soldiers? The distinction is unnecessary. All Zathri serve as needed. The meeting room felt tense. More Zathri officials had joined the talks, their compound eyes constantly watching the 2 humans. Frank noticed small devices on the table that hadn't been there before. We would like to understand human fear better, said a new Zathri with red bands on its arms. These scanners will measure your responses to various scenarios. Frank shook his head. No more tests without full disclosure, please. The fear gas was enough. The red-banded Zathri's antennae flattened against its head. You are not in a position to refuse. Your planet has no defenses against our weapons. Frank kept his voice calm. Is that a threat? It is a fact, the Zathri replied. Captain Vexler made a sharp clicking sound. Council member Drazkan, this is not the approach. We discussed. Frank looked between them. Let me be very clear. Humans respond poorly to threats. If you're thinking of using fear to control us, you should know that fear often makes humans fight harder, not surrender. The council member's mandibles opened wide. Fascinating. Most species become compliant when their survival is threatened. We're not most species, Susan said, speaking up for the first time. Our history is full of smaller human groups defeating larger ones because they refuse to give up, even when afraid. Frank nodded. If you want to understand humans, threatening us is the worst approach. The tension in the room grew as the Zathri council member and Captain Vexler seemed to argue in their own language, their clicks and hisses too fast for the translators to keep up. Finally, Captain Vexler turned to Frank. The council wishes to conduct one more test. No gas this time, just questions. Frank looked at Susan, who gave a small nod. All right. Questions we can handle. Council member Drazkan leaned forward. If the Zathri demanded Earth's complete surrender, with the alternative being destruction, what would humans do? Frank didn't hesitate. We would fight. Even knowing we might lose, we would fight? Even though fighting would mean certain death for many? Even then? Why? The Zathri seemed genuinely confused. Because some things are worth being afraid for, Frank said. Worth dying for, even. Freedom, the right to choose our own path. The future of our children. He looked directly at the council member. We faced our own extinction before from nature, from disease, from our own weapons. Fear didn't stop us then. It won't stop us now. The council member turned to Captain Vexler. The reports were accurate? They are unlike any species we have encountered. Vexler nodded. I told you. They smile when they should cower. They stand firm when they should run. They are... The captain seemed to search for the right word. Unpredictable. Frank smiled again, the same calm smile he had shown when the fear gas filled the room. Actually, we're very predictable ones. You understand us, threaten what we love, and we'll fight. Offer friendship, and you'll find no better allies in the galaxy. The council member's compound eyes studied Frank for a long moment. We have much to discuss, Ambassador Miller. Much. Indeed. A week passed after the tense meeting with council member Drazkan. Frank and Susan were not called for any more official talks. Instead, they were given more freedom to move around certain areas of the main Zathri ship. Frank used this time to learn more about the aliens by talking with the crew members who would speak with him. One evening, as Frank sat in the ship's observation deck looking at Earth, Science Officer Klazar approached him. The council is divided about humans, Klazar said without greeting. Some believe you would make dangerous enemies. Others think you would make valuable allies for the same reasons. Frank turned away from the window. And what do you think, Science Officer? I think you are the most interesting species we have found in 500 years. Klazar sat down beside Frank, the first time any Zathri had done so. Most species we encounter are simple to understand. They fear death. They want resources. They follow predictable patterns. And we don't? You smile when afraid. You fight when outmatched. You value things that have no physical form, ideas, principles, freedom. Klazar's antennae twitched. It makes no logical sense, Frank laughed softly. Humans often don't make logical sense, even to ourselves. I have a proposal, Klazar sighed. The Council wants more information before making their decision about Earth. I suggest we show them how humans respond to real danger, not just simulated fear. Frank frowned. What kind of danger are you talking about? Nothing that would cause permanent harm. A controlled situation where human problem-solving can be observed. Frank thought for a moment. Like a test? Yes, but not with gas or threats. A challenge that requires action, not just words. The next day, Frank and Susan were brought to a different part of the ship they hadn't seen before. Captain Vexter and Council Member Drazkon waited for them in a large, circular room with various equipment around the edges. Ambassador Miller. Vexter said, Science Officer Klazar has suggested a practical demonstration of human abilities. Frank nodded. He mentioned something about that. What kind of demonstration? Council Member Drazkon stepped forward. We have created a simulation based on a real event from Zathri history, a ship malfunction that led to the deaths of an entire crew. We want to see how humans would handle the same crisis. Susan looked nervous. Are we talking about a computer simulation or something more? Physical? Both, Captain Vexter explained. You will be in a sealed chamber. The environmental controls will malfunction just as they did on the historical ship. The air will become thin. The temperature will drop. You will have access to the same tools and information the original crew had. And if we fail, Frank asked, we will end the simulation before any permanent damage occurs, Klazar assured them, entering the room. The Council will observe your responses, your problem-solving, your emotional states. Frank looked at Susan. What do you think? She shrugged. Sounds like another fear test to me, just with a different approach. Perhaps, Frank said. But at least this time they're being honest about it. He turned back to the Zathri. We accept your challenge. The test chamber was smaller than Frank expected, about the size of a large elevator. The walls were covered with control panels with Zathri writing, though a small translator screen had been added. The simulation begins when the door closes, Klazar explained. You will have 30 minutes by your Earth time. The original crew survived for 10 before they lost consciousness. The door sealed with a hiss, and for a minute nothing happened. Then the lights flickered. The temperature began to drop noticeably. A warning sound played, and the translator screen flashed. Environmental system failure, oxygen levels decreasing. Well, Susan said, rubbing her arms as the cold increased, they certainly don't waste time. Frank moved to the control panels. Let's see what we're working with. Can you make sense of any of these symbols? Susan joined him, studying the alien technology. Some of them look like the ones in the diplomatic room. This might be temperature control. And this section seems to relate to air quality. As they worked, the room grew colder. Their breath began to fog in the air. The oxygen levels continued to drop, making it harder to think clearly. The original crew had the same problem we do, Frank said, his words coming a bit slower. They didn't know what to do. They probably panicked. That's what the Zathri expect us to do, Susan said. They think fear will make us stop thinking. Frank smiled despite the cold. Then let's surprise them again. Instead of trying random controls, they methodically studied the patterns on the panels. Susan noticed that certain symbols appeared in groups. Frank realized that the colors of the panels might indicate their functions. 20 minutes into the simulation, they were shivering badly. The air was thin enough that they had to take deep breaths to get enough oxygen. But they had figured out part of the system. These red controls are for emergency situations. Frank said, his fingers numb as he pressed a sequence of buttons. And this symbol means override. Nothing happened. Wait, Susan said, her voice weak. In the diplomatic room, the Zathri always use sequences of 3. Their language seems based on 3s. Frank nodded and tried again, pressing the override symbol 3 times. The panel lit up, revealing a new set of controls. Now we're getting somewhere, he said. With only 5 minutes left, they managed to restore partial environmental control. The temperature stopped dropping, though it didn't warm up. The oxygen levels stabilized, though still lower than comfortable. When the door finally opened, they stumbled out, cold and dizzy, but conscious and smiling. The Zathri observers stood in silence. Captain Vexler stepped forward. The original crew died because they focused on calling for help rather than solving the problem, the captain said. They gave in to fear. Humans feel fear too, Frank said, still catching his breath. But we use it. It sharpens our focus. Council member Draskon's compound eyes seemed to narrow. You knew this was just a test. In a real emergency, we would have done even better, Susan interrupted. Because the stakes would be real. Science Officer Klazar approached with scanning devices. Their stress hormones were extremely elevated, heart rates near maximum safe levels. Yet cognitive function remained high. The officer turned to the council member. Just as I predicted, Frank looked around at the gathered Zathri. So, did we pass your test? Pass? Captain Vexler made a sound the translators couldn't interpret. Ambassador Miller, you did something much more significant. You changed the test itself. The day after the simulation test, Frank woke to find the Zathri ship buzzing with activity. Crew members moved quickly through the hallways, and even the guards seemed tense. When Science Officer Klazar came to escort them to breakfast, Frank asked what was happening. A ship has been detected entering this solar system, Klazar explained. It belongs to the Vrex, a species we have been in conflict with for many years. Are they dangerous? Susan asked. Very. They are territorial and view any contact with other species as a threat to their dominance. Klazar's antennae twitched rapidly. They especially dislike when the Zathri make first contact with new species. Frank frowned. Are they coming because of us? Most likely. Our ships have been in orbit around Earth for 2 weeks now. Long enough for them to notice and respond. Instead of going to the usual dining area, Klazar led them to the bridge of the ship. Captain Vexler stood before a large screen showing a small red dot moving toward Earth. Ambassador Miller, Susan Baker, the captain said without turning. You should see this. It concerns your planet's safety. Frank moved beside the captain. Officer Klazar told us about the Vrex. How serious is this? Serious enough that the Council has voted to allow you on the bridge during a tactical situation. Captain Vexler finally turned to face them. The Vrex ship will arrive in 6 hours. They have weapons that could cause significant damage to your planet. What do they want? Susan asked. To drive us away. To ensure we do not form an alliance with Earth. The captain's voice was flat. They have done this with 3 other species we discovered in the past century. Frank felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. And what happened to those other species? There was a long pause before Vexler answered. 2 surrendered to Vrex demands and remain isolated, unable to join the wider galactic community. The 3rd resisted. And? Frank pressed. Their civilization was damaged severely. They have not recovered. The weight of the situation settled on Frank's shoulders. Earth had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. They had no weapons that could fight an advanced alien species. What are our options? He asked. Captain Vexler gestured to the screen. We can leave this system before they arrive. The Vrex would likely then make their own contact with Earth on their terms, which would be bad for us, Susan guessed. Yes, they do not believe in equality between species. What's our second option? Frank asked. We stay and face them. We have 4 ships, they have 1, but their weapons are powerful. If they choose to attack rather than talk, there would be risk to Earth. Frank and Susan exchanged glances. Neither option sounded good? Is there a third option? Frank asked. Something they wouldn't expect? Council member Drazkon, who had been silent until now, made a sharp clicking sound. This is why we brought you here, Ambassador Miller. Humans think differently. The Vrex understand fear and power. They do not understand your species. For the next few hours, they discussed possible approaches. The Zathri explained that the Vrex were physically imposing large, muscular beings with thick scales covering their bodies. They respected strength above all else and saw diplomacy as a sign of weakness. What if, Frank said slowly, we don't show fear or aggression? What if we invite them to talk? They would see it as weakness, Captain Vexler said, not if we frame it correctly. Frank turned to Science Officer Klazar. You've studied human history. What happens when someone stronger threatens us? Klazar's antennae twitched. You form alliances. You use technology to overcome physical disadvantages. You employ unusual tactics. Exactly. And sometimes we walk straight toward danger with a smile. Frank turned back to the captain. Let me speak to them when they arrive. The Vrex ship was massive, nearly twice the size of the largest Zathri vessel. When it entered Earth orbit, it positioned itself between the Zathri fleet and the planet. A clear message that they were claiming Earth for themselves. Their first communication was simple: Zathri ships. Leave this system immediately. Captain Vexler looked at Frank, who nodded. The captain opened the channel. This is Captain Vexler of the Zathri Dominion. We are here as guests of Earth. I have Ambassador Frank Miller of Earth with me. He wishes to speak with you. There was a long pause before the reply came. We do not recognize any right of humans to diplomacy. This is between Zathri and Vrex. Frank stepped forward. This is Ambassador Miller. I represent Earth and all humans. Any discussion about our planet must include us. The screen flickered and a large reptilian face appeared. The Vrex commander had dark green scales and yellow eyes with vertical pupils. So the prey wishes to speak before being hunted. Amusing, Frank smiled, the same calm smile he had shown when the fear gas filled the room. The Zathri have learned something about humans that you might find valuable, Commander. We do not respond to threats the way other species do. All beings fear death, human. True, but fear doesn't control us. It doesn't make us surrender. Frank kept his voice steady. The Zathri tested us with their fear gas. They put us in danger simulations. They even threatened our planet. And do you know what they discovered? The Vrex commander's eyes narrowed. Enlighten me, small creature. That humans smile when they should cower, that we solve problems when we should panic, that we stand together when we should break apart. Frank took a step closer to the screen. The Zathri were confused by this. I wonder if you will be too. For the first time, the Vrex commander seemed uncertain. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you join us for talks, all three species. Because if you're hoping to intimidate Earth into submission, you should. Know that our history is filled with smaller forces defeating larger ones. Not because we were stronger, but because we refused to give in to fear. The Vrex commander was silent for a long moment. Then he made a sound that might have been a laugh. You have courage, human. Foolish courage, but courage nonetheless. It's not foolish if it works, Frank replied, still smiling. So, will you talk, or will you prove to everyone watching that you fear a conversation more than we fear your weapons? Susan held her breath. The Zathri bridge crew stood perfectly still. Even Captain Vexler seemed stunned by Frank's approach. Finally, the Vrex commander spoke. Very well, Ambassador Miller of Earth, you have earned 20 minutes of my time, no more. When the communication ended, the bridge erupted in the clicking sounds of Zathri conversation. Captain Vexler turned to Frank. That was either the bravest or most foolish approach I have ever witnessed, the captain said. The Vrex never agree to talks with species they consider inferior. Frank's smile faded. I just bought us 20 minutes. Now we need to figure out what to do with them. Science Officer Klazar approached. The human used the Vrex's own psychology against them, made backing down seem like the fearful choice. The officer looked at Frank with what seemed like new respect. Perhaps there is more to learn from humans than we realized. Preparations for the meeting with the Vrex commander happened quickly. The Zathri chose a neutral meeting room on their main ship. Security was tight, with guards positioned at every entrance. Frank and Susan spent the short time they had planning their approach. "The Vrex respect strength," Frank said as they walked toward the meeting room. "But they define strength differently than we do," Susan nodded. "To them, strength is about power and control. To us, it can be about standing up for what's right even when we're afraid." "Exactly. We need to show them a kind of strength they don't understand." When they entered the meeting room, Captain Vexter and Council Member Drazcon were already there. The large table in the center had 3 sides, symbolizing the 3 species about to meet. "Remember," Captain Vexter said quietly, "the Vrex are not like us. They do not value cooperation or mutual benefit. They understand only dominance or submission." "Then we'll have to teach them a new way of thinking," Frank replied. The door on the opposite side opened. The Vrex delegation entered, led by their commander. In person, they were even more intimidating than on the screen. The commander stood over 7 feet tall, with powerful muscles visible beneath his green scales. 2 equally large Vrex followed him, carrying weapons that looked capable of cutting through the metal walls. "So," the Vrex commander said, his voice deep and rumbling, "these are the humans who smile at fear." He looked down at Frank and Susan, yellow eyes unblinking. "I am Commander Zorax of the Vrex Imperium. I have 20 minutes to determine whether your species deserves to exist independently." Frank stepped forward, extending his hand as he had done when first meeting the Zathri. "Commander Zorax, I am Ambassador Frank Miller of Earth. This is my assistant, Susan Baker. We appreciate you agreeing to this meeting." The commander ignored the hand. "Sit, I have questions." They all took their places at the 3-sided table. The Vrex on one side, the Zathri on another, and the humans on the third. "Why have the Zathri taken interest in your planet?" Commander Zorax asked bluntly. Frank looked at Captain Vexter, then back to the Vrex commander. "I believe they find U.S. interesting. We respond to situations differently than other species they've encountered." "He refers to the fear response," Captain Vexter added. "Humans can function at high cognitive levels even when experiencing intense fear." The Vrex commander's scaled face showed no expression. "All species can be broken by fear. It is simply a matter of finding the right pressure point." "Perhaps," Frank said. "But let me ask you something, Commander. What do the Vrex fear?" The room went silent. The Vrex guards took a step forward, hands tightening on their weapons. Commander Zorax's yellow eyes narrowed to slits. "We fear nothing," he said, voice dangerously low. Frank smiled. "Everyone fears something, Commander. The Zathri fear chaos and disorder. Humans fear many things: death, loss, failure. Fear itself isn't weakness. How we respond to fear defines us." "You speak in circles, human." The commander leaned forward. "Let me be direct. The Vrex Imperium claims this solar system. The Zathri will leave. Earth will acknowledge Vrex authority. This is not negotiable." Susan spoke up for the first time. "And if we refuse, then your planet will suffer the consequences." Frank maintained his calm expression. "Commander Zorax, before you make threats, there's something you should understand about humans. Throughout our history, we've faced extinction many times from nature, from disease, from our own weapons. Each time, we survived not because we were the strongest, but because we worked together and refused to give up." "Noble words before defeat," the commander said dismissively. "Not just words?" Frank stood up slowly. "Right now, while we've been talking, Earth has been preparing. Our governments have united, our weapons have been readied. Yes, they're primitive compared to yours, but there are billions of us, Commander. Billions of humans who would rather die fighting than live under tyranny." This wasn't entirely true. Earth governments had been informed of the situation, but they were still debating how to respond. Frank was gambling on the Vrex not knowing this. "You would sacrifice your civilization?" Commander Zorax asked, sounding genuinely curious, "If necessary. But I'm offering an alternative." Frank looked at both the Vrex and Zathri. "Alliance instead of dominance." All three of our species working together, each contributing our unique strengths. Council member Drazkan clicked in surprise. The council has not approved, and neither has Earth, Frank interrupted. But I'm proposing it now because it's the logical choice. The Zathri have technology and knowledge. The Vrex have strength and resources. Humans have adaptability and innovation. Commander Zorax stood towering over everyone. The Vrex do not form alliances. We conquer. And how has that worked so far? Frank asked. How many enemies have you made? How much energy do you spend maintaining control over unwilling subjects? Imagine instead having willing partners who bring new ideas, new approaches. The commander was silent, his reptilian face unreadable. You said humans interest you because we smile at fear, Frank continued. Here's why. We've learned that facing our fears often leads to something better on the other side. Right now, you fear that an alliance would make you appear weak. I'm suggesting it would make you stronger in ways you haven't considered. Commander Zorax looked at Captain Vexther. Is this how all humans negotiate? With impossible ideas and thinly veiled threats? The Zathri captain's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Ambassador Miller has consistently surprised us as well. But I find myself considering his proposal. An alliance would be unconventional, but potentially beneficial. The Vrex commander paced the room, his tail swishing behind him. Finally, he turned back to Frank. You have courage, human. Your species is either very brave or very foolish, he paused. Perhaps both. We're practical, Frank said. We know when to fight and when to talk. Right now, talking serves everyone better. Commander Zorax nodded slowly. I will bring this proposal to the Imperium. No promises are made, but hostilities will be delayed until a decision is reached. After the Vrex left, Captain Vexther turned to Frank. That was remarkably effective, Ambassador. The Vrex never delay their conquests. Frank finally let out the breath he'd been holding. I took a chance. Appealed to their self-interest while giving them a way to back down without losing face. Council member Drazkan approached. You have done what no Zathri diplomat has managed in 3 centuries, given the Vrex pause. The council will want to discuss your alliance proposal immediately. As they left the meeting room, Susan whispered to Frank, Do you think it will work? A 3-species alliance? Frank smiled, the same calm, confident smile he had shown when the fear gas filled the room. I don't know. But I do know that when different perspectives come together, amazing things can happen. The Zathri taught us about unity. Maybe we can teach them and the Vrex about turning fear into courage. Science Officer Klazar was waiting for them in the hallway. I have completed my final report on humans for the Council, the officer said. Would you like to know my conclusion? Frank nodded. Humans are the most valuable species we have ever encountered, precisely because they understand fear better than anyone else. Klazar's antennae twitched. You do not deny fear or surrender to it. You acknowledge it, carry it, and smile anyway. That is true strength. As they walked back toward their quarters, Earth was visible through a window, a small blue marble hanging in space, somehow seeming both fragile and resilient at the same time. Frank thought about all the fears and challenges humans had faced throughout their history and all those yet to come. And he smiled.